What's up, design family, and welcome to another episode of FittDesign TV. On today's episode, we'll be looking at the top shipping terms that you have to know and consider if you're doing international business, if you're manufacturing overseas. Undoubtedly, you've seen what look like hieroglyphs on price quotations that you received, for example, FOB, EXW, and you've wondered, what did those mean? They're super important to know what it means, and if you watch this video, you'll know, you'll be a lot more informed, and you'll be able to make educated decisions moving forward. Welcome to FittDesign TV. On this channel, we'll explore what it takes to make it as an activewear fashion brand, whilst providing tips, tricks, and actionable steps towards starting your own product line. Whether you're an entrepreneur looking to start your own brand, or just someone interested in fitness fashion, there's something for you here. So first, we have to understand what is the broad spectrum of these terms. In general, what these terms are trying to refer to, or what they're trying to find a resolution to, is the shift of liability between the seller, aka the factory, and the buyer, aka the brand, the company that's buying the goods, and the liability that is had on the specific goods that are being transported. So all the terms that we'll be referring to will shift the liability from one side to the other, and they'll accurately dictate where or who holds the liability, up until what point, and at what point the liability is transferred over to the second party. So these terms are typically known as Incoterms or international commerce terms. They were originally coined in 1936. They've just been recently updated as recently as 2011, and they're really important. They're used pretty much everywhere in the world, whether you're manufacturing locally or you're manufacturing overseas. Understanding what these terms mean are going to give you a lot more experience. It's going to give you a lot more ability to negotiate in your contracts and your price quotations, and just overall the peace of mind of knowing where your liability holds or stands when it comes to a specific contract that you have with the supplier. So first, we'll start all the way on the left side of the spectrum towards the seller, where the buyer holds most of the liability on the goods. And that starts with EXW or X works. And that typically means that the buyer incurs the risk of transporting the goods, clearing the goods, importing the goods, transporting the goods to the final warehouse from the point in which the seller finishes the production of the goods. So the buyer has to arrange for pickup of the goods, unloading of the goods onto the truck, transporting the goods from the factory warehouse to the port of export, clearing those goods, transporting those goods. So pretty much the buyer assumes the entire spectrum of responsibility. That's what EXW means. Next, we have FCA, which means that the seller delivers the goods. So they unload the goods onto the trucks once they're done, deliver them to the port of export, and they clear them for export, and then the buyer assumes all remaining responsibility. So FCA, free carrier, and then typically it's the place of delivery. So to be, if you're shipping from China, let's just say Shenzhen, it would say FCA Shenzhen, which means that the seller has to transport and clear the goods for export up until the port of export in Shenzhen. Next, we have the FAS, which is very similar to FCA, and it just means free alongside. Again, the seller assumes the responsibility of packing the goods, transporting the goods to the port of export, clearing them for export, and then placing the goods alongside the transport vessel that's going to be used to ship the goods. And then from there, the buyer assumes the responsibility of unloading the goods onto the transport vessel, and then everything that comes after that. Next, we have FOB. If you've ever done overseas manufacturing, you've probably heard of FOB, which means free on board. And this is in which the the seller takes on the responsibility of packing the goods, transporting the goods, clearing them for export, loading them onto the transport vessel, and then everything from there is the responsibility of the buyer. So FOB, the most common terms with the price you see, is typically with the goods cleared for export, ready to ship, and then on the vessel, and then everything after that is the responsibility of the buyer. Next, we have CFR, which is short for cost and freight. And typically what this means is that the ownership transfers to the buyer at the port or terminal of destination. So once the goods arrive at your terminal or port of destination, it's on the buyer to assume all responsibility of clearing the goods, offloading the goods, transporting the goods onto whatever means of transport are going to take it to the warehouse, and then when it gets to the warehouse, offloading the goods off the trucks, and then stacking and pretty much taking care of everything after that. So that is what CFR means, and it's typically a 50-50 balance between the seller and the buyer. Next we have CPT, which means carriage paid to, and typically you want to include the name of the destination. So if you're shipping to Los Angeles, CPT Los Angeles, and here the seller pays for the carriage of the goods up until the named place of the destination. So after that, once the goods are delivered to a specific destination, they're meant to be handed off to the main or secondary carrier. So the seller relinquishes all liability after they hand it off to whatever company or buyer is taking the goods and then transporting them to the final warehouse. So this is very important, but if the buyer requires that the goods be insured, they should consider the sister term for this term, which is CIP, which means carriage and insurance paid to, again with the destination port put in the name, and that typically includes the same terms as CPT but with insurance, and typically you'll want a policy that insures the goods up until 110% of the total invoice value of those goods, and the insurance policy should be, or it has to be, in the same currency as the production contract that's been put in place to secure these goods. So if you have your contract in USD, it should be in USD. If you have your contract in RMB, it should be in RMB. This is to protect any other fluctuations in currencies when it comes to the insured value of the goods and the actual value of the goods on paper. Next we have DAT, which is delivered at terminal, and that typically means that the Incoterms requires that the seller delivers all the goods unloaded at the named terminal. So once they arrive at the terminal, the seller still has to take on the responsibility of offloading the goods off of the transport vessel and then handing them over to the buyer. And if the seller is unable to arrange for offloading, for example, if they're operating in a country which they're not very familiar with and they don't have the logistics in that region, or the forwarder doesn't have the logistics, they should definitely consider DAP, which is delivered at place, which is very similar to DAT, but the transfer of liability is when the seller delivers the goods to the final terminal or the import terminal. The buyer then assumes the responsibility of offloading the goods and then importing the goods, or pretty much paying all the duties and taxes, and then transporting them to the final destination that's specified on the invoice or on the contract. DAP terms can be specific to a specific warehouse or location. So DAP also refers to the destination. If you have the destination set as a terminal or a port, that's what's going to be on there. If you have the destination set as the warehouse, then the buyer will have to, or the seller will have to, assume all responsibility transporting the goods and not offloading them up until the warehouse. So that's DAP. And then the final, which is DDP, is considered as delivery duty paid, and this puts the maximum amount of liability on the seller, and that's where the seller is responsible for delivering the goods to the named place in the contract and pays all costs on bringing the goods to the destination, including import duties and taxes. So that's pretty much up until the final destination. The seller is responsible for all costs associated with transporting these goods, from the export to the import to the final, like the stretch, the final mile stretch that they have to deliver to the warehouse, if that's named in the contract as the final destination delivery point. And then anything after that, such as offloading off of the beds of the truck into the warehouse, then the responsibility of the buyer. So I know it can get a bit confusing. There's a lot of terms here. Hopefully this video has done a decent job to go through these terms little by little and explain them in basic terminology. If you guys have any terms that you think we missed, these are pretty much the main terms that are used. But if there are any terms that we missed, do feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you want to see other technical glossary videos, please let me know. Always love making these videos and sharing this kind of knowledge. Also for me, it is a learning experience. I do work in this field, but it's always good to sit down and do a bit more research and really get down to the detailed points. Thank you guys for tuning in to FittDesign TV. It's always a pleasure to have you guys here. I'd love to hear from you guys. If you want to see any of the future videos, do leave them in the comments below. Smash a thumbs up, subscribe, and see you guys in the next one. Stay awesome.